almost 19,000 games released on Steam last year. You're not only going up against 19,000 games released, you're going up against all the games ever released on Steam. 85% of play hours were on older games, back catalogue games.
Today I'm joined by a publishing expert with over a decade in the games industry. He's led publishing at Sega, Curve Games, launched over a dozen titles personally, and reviewed hundreds of pitches. What does a developer need to know about how a publisher works?
I don't think it's often talked about enough in terms of what's at stake for the publisher. A lot of publishers are really trying to do good. They want to be successful with you. If they don't find success with you, then what's left for them?
We're going to talk about what makes your game investable from a publisher's perspective, the common pitfalls, and why publishing isn't something you bolt on at the end, and what to do about it.
You have up to 3 shots per publisher. If they say no the first time, there's a really good chance when you send it through again a few months later with improvements, they'll look at it with some seriousness a second time. Beyond 3 times, it's probably never going to happen. Unlike before, you need to prove the product market fit. If you've already got strong amount of wish lists, I'm talking 50k wish lists or above, then people will absolutely take you very, very seriously.
From someone who's helping studios actually get signed in 2025, this episode's guest and founder of Kando Factory, Bobby Wertheim. Today we're going to get into 2025 guide to publishing, maybe this publisher side of the story, and with your experience as a game scout, I'm very excited to kind of dig in to kind of bust some myths and also just give people a practical guide. So a bit of background. So Bobby's been in the game for a very long time, a decade plus. And recently, I want to get straight into it. You mentioned at a global top round event that the current market was a cluster F word. So like a chaotic landscape, right? There's a lot of post-pandemic boom happening. And I wanted to get into just straight into like a lay of the land of the environment of publishing, and then the publisher side of the story, and just to remember as a developer the opportunity and what's out there, and then straight into like biggest mistakes to avoid, and then a practical step-by-step of things to get into. So I'll definitely stay to the end of the episode to catch all of that. So lovely. Bobby, I would love to just hear what is, I guess, happening right now. Like you mentioned in that global top round, I just wanted you to just kind of set us for this conversation today.
Yeah, so that was from an event back in like late 2023, I think it was, where I said that. And yeah, and you know what? The environment hasn't really improved since, right? I think the outlook for 2025, a lot of people in 2024 were like, survive 2024, right? That was like the slogan within the games industry almost. And then as we were nearing the end of the year, and even maybe in January this year, 2025, people were like, thrive in 2025. That became like the new slogan for a short period. And there was this optimism from the industry, which is really nice, right? And the industry is always changing. It's super dynamic. It's full of creative, talented people. Surely it's going to be fine eventually. I'm sure it will. There's like on the top, highest level, the industry is generating a huge amount of revenue. Right. So it's a really vibrant industry. And I don't want to be a damp squid and be negative Nelly or anything, but we've already seen quite a few headlines of studio closures, layoffs, etc. already this year, quite significant ones, and a fair few of them as well. And I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. And the reason why I think we're in the place that we are right now as an industry, I don't think it's because of one single cause, but it's multiple things, right? And to understand where we are today, I think you do have to kind of look back and think about, well, what's led us to this point? And therefore, you know, what could happen in the future, right? And I'm a historian at heart, like an art historian. So I've always been interested in history and, you know.
I think it'd be good, Bobby, to hear you explain, like, what is your perspective here for people who don't know? Because I think people might have heard the word Game Scout, but it'd be good to understand, like, what is your day-to-day like? Like, what perspective do you have?
Yeah, so, like, I started in industry in 2009 and been at various big gaming companies like PlayStation, Sega, Curve Games. And now I've founded my own company, Kando Factory. And at Kando Factory, it's a small team of 5 people. We do a fair bit of consulting work. And my perspective is really from like the kind of commercial view, right? I'm not a game developer. I'm the commercial guy. I'm the guy that does deals. I do a lot of biz dev work. I have a really good understanding of publishing from the kind of very beginning to end of the value chain of publishing in general. So I tend to look at things from really kind of big picture view, and then drill down into, all right, what is this game? What makes it special? Does it have a place to exist in our industry? Does it have a strong kind of calling for people? Would it be really attractive? Does it have a potential long tail? Blah, blah, blah. So I look at things from a really project level, but I also tend to look at things on a macro, really big picture view level as well. And before the games industry, I used to be an antiques dealer. And so I've always been into history and stuff, right? Going back to what I was talking about earlier. So when you think about the history of games, it's like it started off massively in the arcade, right? Coin op. It was this sort of like you go to the arcades, you put in a coin and you get your dopamine hit, and the game will be so enticing that you'd want to put in another coin, right? If it was a good game, you'd keep playing. And you'll have queues of people playing at a single machine, right? And whenever there was a new game coming out, it'll be a new cabinet to be released. It'll go into the arcade. And then that arcade, if it had the newest, latest machines, would naturally attract a lot of people. And if you had an arcade that wasn't being updated and it was just showing the same games on the show floor as it had done the previous 2-3 years, then naturally the number of people attending that arcade would diminish, right? So there was this sort of like refresh happening constantly within the arcades. And then the games industry moved into console. And with consoles, you had the refresh happening every time there was a new console release. And you used to buy games in boxes, and it'll be in shops, and there'll be this impulse purchase happening. But also, every time there's a new console released, the shops will want to have the latest machines. They'll want to have the latest catalog of games. And so all of the older games will quite quickly phase out and move into the secondhand shops, right? So there was this total refresh happening every time a new console was coming out. A little bit like the arcades, but a lot more in stages at that point, rather than like a consistent update happening. And then now we're living in a world where mobile is half of the revenue in the games industry. And then PC, console, web, HTML, blah, blah. That adds up the other half. But most of the stores are now digital. And most of the really, really popular stores are permanent stores. You know, they're persistent. So let's say you look at Steam, or you look at Apple Arcade, or you look at Google Play Store. Doesn't matter what platform you're playing on, what device you're playing on, most of these digital stores are now permanent, right? So that means you're not only going up against games of your current generation, you're going up against games that are as old as that storefront. So say, for example, Steam, Valve, they did like a roundup of data of how their players performed, like how they behaved over the course of 2024. Right at the end of 2024, early this year, they released this report. This is a roundup of what it looked like. There was 15% of play hours of all of its players of Steam played games released in 2024. 85% of people were spending their play hours playing games older than 2024 releases. And there were like almost 19,000 games released on Steam last year. So you're not only going up against 19,000 games released, you're going up against all the games ever released on Steam. And the most popular games, the games that people are spending most of their time on, 85% of play hours, were on older games, right? Back catalog games. And this isn't just happening on Steam. This is happening on all of the storefronts, right? So back in the day, going back again, console cycle, it used to be there was a console refresh. There's a new platform. It's a new store. You have to buy the new games. All the other games were redundant. Now it's like backwards compatibility. There's an online store. and you can buy all the older games. So it's like, it's a tough market, right? That's one reason why the market is where it is. I think
I'd say, just to speak on that, like this came up on a few podcasts as the old game problem, where it's just you're fighting against those old games. They're not even, some of them aren't necessarily old as in they're dead. Like some of them are like Fortnite, where you're competing with new features, or Lego Fortnite, where it's a game within a game. That's what me and my brother did, for example. It's like I didn't have to pay for anything. Or there's a lot of games which are on Game Pass, which maybe come back in. So they are paying in some way. But it's interesting because hearing you outlay the history like that, I think is really important, where it makes sense why that didn't happen before, because it was just logistically not possible. Like you need a new machine, you need a new front, and the fact that it is now, and the 19,000 games, it's a lot. And there was one question I wanted to ask. Like I asked this on a previous guest who did a lot of publishing, and I asked him like, oh, out of those 19,000 games, how many of those games do you think are like quote unquote good? Because I feel like it's so much easier to publish a game now on Steam, for example. So I wonder if that number is as big as it seems. I was wondering what your perspective on that was.
So I don't have the data to back it up, honestly. So it'll just be my opinion. But let's say the top 1% of games, so out of the 19,000 games, maybe 2,000 games are stellar. Really, really good games. They're commercially performing well. They're well loved by its players. They're really, really good games. Top 5% of games, I'd say, are also really, really good. They at least probably broke even commercially. And, so a lot of people played with it, engaged with it, and probably still play them today. When you get into the top 20%, I think that's where it's like, all right, there's some games there that maybe didn't make its money back, but actually there's some really, really good games there. Generally speaking, they're good games, top 20%. So if you take 20% of 19,000, let's say it's 20,000, right? There's like 4,000 good games released last year. Just be really, really crude, right? But I would say actually the ratio is probably better. There's probably a lot of good games that are received really well by the people who've played it, bought the game and played it. It's, nearly overwhelmingly positive, right? But it's just not being played by enough people, right? There's so many of these games. So actually, I'd say more than 4,000 games easily are really, really good games. I think there's a lot of good games out there that just haven't been discovered. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know exactly what percentage I could say is the right amount. It's half of them really good games. I don't know.
It's hard to define good as well, but
yeah,
I think objectively speaking, good relative to like 10 years ago, maybe, but now it doesn't matter because good is a relative term. So even if they were good a while ago, now they're not as good.
So yeah, the old game problem is one problem. The other problem is obviously the investment coming into the industry has been reduced a fair bit compared to say 3 years ago. And that is because of multiple reasons, but interest rates going up is one reason. It was almost 0% interest rate around the world. So that made people want to invest in games. And during COVID, there was this huge uplift in the games industry. There was a lot of interest in the games industry. So there was a lot of money coming in. That's now the taps are being turned off. I think, like you say, publishing a game is now way easier than it used to be. So there's just so many more games. So there's just the old game problem. There's the currently so many games being released today compared to before problem. There's the lack of investment problem. There's quite a few. I think there's a lot of headwind, right, that we're facing. And it's almost similar point to what I was pointing out before, but this kind of persistent store thing, right? A lot of these stores are now persistent, they're ongoing, they haven't changed. And there hasn't been this revolution in how games are being distributed, right? there's this stagnation in the distribution channel. And I think that's also another reason, or it's a different way of saying the same problem, of the old game problem in a way. And yeah, there used to be a lot of free money in the industry, as what people were referring as free money, where you could do a deal with a platform holder before your game released and already be in the black, right? Like you're already making money before your games even come out. We're not in that situation anymore. That's basically gone. So there's probably a whole load of other reasons why we're in the situation where we're in. But yeah, I think it's ultimately there's a lot of people playing games. There's a lot of people spending money on games. There's some games that are absolutely smashing it, right? Like commercially doing really, really well and loved by its players and engaged for years and years. But then there's just so many games coming out that haven't performed. And I think that's why we're in the place that we are. And that's what that's led to is publishers, like the dynamic of publishers and how they operate, how they have to, because they need to continue to exist as a business. Like how they operate has changed a bit, right? So that's another outcome of where we are. So say previously when I was scouting games 8 years ago, I would find a game, a pitch, it'll be a paper pitch, not a single line of code, but it's a great vision by a team with pedigree asking for multiple millions, and I would sign it. And I did. I signed those games, and some of them became really, really successful. Today, that's not really happening anymore, right? Today, the onus is on the developer to have a prototype, maybe even a vertical slice. Maybe even they should have wish lists and a vibrant community before a publisher goes, all right, I'll put money down. So like, I call it and I see it, not just me, but in the business world, like people call it, proving the product market fit, right? Before, the onus of proving the product market fit was with the publisher. Today, it's really up to the developer to prove that before they can get the investment from a publisher.
I think it's kind of emulating, I guess, how you raise money in other industries, right? Like usually you need to have some users. Back in the day, if you had growing users, they could figure out revenue later, but that's changed as well. Like you need to have cash flow, not just growing users. So I think it's a bit of a correction, right? So we've just laid out why we're in this situation. And I want to speak to the developer here listening. He's like, okay, Bobby, it sounds like it's going to be very, very tough. Why should I even bother, right? But from what you told me before the show, there are games being signed. There are really games that you're helping find publishers. So activity is still happening because, like we said, top line, there's revenue, despite the kind of headwinds. So if I'm a developer, I'm facing the headwinds. I know they're there, but I'm still going to go through. I would love if we could clarify for that developer what the publisher is looking at. Like what's their day-to-day? Because you mentioned before the show that the publisher side isn't really told in terms of like how their financials work. And I think it'd be very beneficial for a developer to come into a kind of conversation with a publisher knowing their side, right? You want to pitch to them based on their kind of incentives, not yours. So yeah, I'd love you to kind of lay out like what does a developer need to know about how a publisher works?
Yeah, okay. So maybe first I'll talk about what a publisher is in the games industry in general from an investor perspective. Like I'll talk about that first. And then I'll talk about what you need to do to really kind of like stand out and actually secure a really good publishing deal. So first of all, like there's different types of funding sources, right? There's like, maybe if you're in a geographically great location, you've got a local government funding source that's really, really great. Maybe you're in a country where there's some banks that will take you really seriously and loan you the money, right? Or maybe you can go to VCs or angels or whatever and get investment that way. And then you have publishers as well who can provide funding, right, as an investor, but they also provide publishing services. when you look at those different types of funding sources, publishers are the ones who have the most at stake. This is what people don't really, I think, realize, right? Like when you have an angel or, some kind of VC who provides funding, they're doing that in exchange for equity in your company, right? They're taking a share of your company. So they own something. They own a part of your company, and it's pretty permanent, right? Until they exit and they sell their shares, they're, part owner of your company, right? So whether that initial game that they provide funding to you with, whether it's successful or not, they still walk away owning a part of your company. If it's a bank, they're only going to lend you money if there's some kind of guarantee. They're never going to go into a situation loaning money where they can't get the money back, right? So they're always going to win in some way, right? You might lose your house or whatever, right? If it's a government system, some kind of government scheme, usually what they're looking to do is provide employment and therefore generate taxes off the back of it. So no matter what happens to the game, obviously they want the game to be successful. They want your company to be successful. But really, no matter what happens, they've got their budgets and they're going to make sure it all tallies up in the end in some way, right? And some programs are going to be more successful than others, but their objective of why they're investing is very particular, right? Publishers, when they invest in a game, typically they don't take equity. They don't take shares in the company, right? They're funding the project. And if the project is a failure, they lose everything. Like they lose their investment completely, unlike the other types of investors that I've just mentioned. So there's a lot at stake for publishers when they invest in games, in that the game really, really needs to be successful. Otherwise, they can't continue to exist, unlike the other types of investors, because they're working on a rev share model where they share revenue with the developer. And it's a spectrum in terms of what does a rev share look like with a publisher, right? Like there's no standard publishing deal really. There's some that have become public, some that are very well known publishing deals by certain publishers, but every publisher has its own sort of rev share model, and it's very, very different. And even within the same publisher, they most likely usually have different rev share models depending on the game, right? Depending on how much they're investing, how much the developer's already invested, what the commercials look like in terms of their projections. So there's no standard publishing deal. But what, generally speaking, you can say a standard is usually publishing deals are rev share based. And usually if the game fails, they're going to lose all their money. So they've invested the money to develop the game, probably. Sometimes they fully fund, sometimes they part fund. There are publishers who are only funding the publishing effort and not the development effort. But usually publishers are funding the development effort. So the developer's being paid for their salaries to make the game. And then when you release the game, the publisher's spending more money on QA, localization, marketing. And if the game fails, they've lost all that money. Like they're not able to make that money back. Whereas if it
Just understand, Bobby.
Yeah.
Is that most cases? Because that for me seems a bit crazy as a business model. So the publisher invests money, and then the only way they get paid back is rev share. And if it doesn't work out, which we established at the start of the call, is most likely, like 80% of games probably won't be commercially viable. And that's probably generous. Maybe it's even 95%, 99% for some industries. And that's the current publishing deals being signed. Like I would imagine that 5 years ago, but is that still the case now? Is that what developers are seeking?
Yeah, that's usually what's happening. That's generally speaking what's happening. So publishers have a lot at stake, right? Which is why some publishers are tightening up their belts and providing less funding into the actual development of the game and coming on later in the development process. Or maybe there's some publishers just overall just reducing their budgets in terms of their spend per project. Maybe they're trying to take a bigger rev share and recouping fully before they go into rev share, right? That's quite a typical model. That's always existed in the past. But that's how they de-risk the project, right? That's how they de-risk their investment. But they're not like looking to, usually publishers aren't like, hey, we're going to take equity as well, you know? Because then you're burning the candle on both ends. Because you invest in a company for equity because you want that company value to grow. But if you're taking rev share from them, then the equity isn't going to grow as well, right? So it doesn't really make sense to take both anyway. Conceptually, it doesn't make sense. So usually they're taking rev share, right? And if the game doesn't work out, it's a failure for the publisher. So there's a lot at stake for publishers compared to other investor types, is what I wanted to get across. I don't think it's often talked about enough in terms of what's at stake for the publisher. It's often like talked about in the industry like, oh, publishers are evil and they're doing all this nasty stuff. And it's actually predominantly a lot of publishers are really trying to do good. They want to be successful with you, right? Because if they don't find success with you, then it's what's left for them. There's not much left. Usually, you can talk about what the long-term interest in the game is for a publisher. So let's say a game, they sign with a publisher. Sometimes they'll say, well, we want first right of refusal and last matching rights on the IP, right? So any prequel, sequel, spin-off games of that IP that they invested in, it must first go to that publisher for them to have the opportunity to continue to work with you on that IP, right? That's the first right of refusal. And if they say, no, we don't want to work on this anymore, then you can go to someone else to work with and get someone else to publish that sequel, prequel, spin-off game. That's how they kind of like take some kind of future option rights in the game. So if it's successful, they get to continue to work on it. And then sometimes they'll take last matching rights, which is like a little bit more onerous, where let's say with the first right of refusal, it's, as I explained, you have to go back to that publisher to say, hey, I'm going to work on, I don't know, Harry's Supermarket Simulator 2 game, right? Because it's number 2, I'm going to come to you first. And then they say, no, we don't want to work on that one. You go to someone else. They're like, oh, actually, yeah. Publisher Bobby is like, I want to work with you on that. If that initial publishing deal had last matching rights, it means now you need to go back and go, actually, I've been offered this deal from Bobby Publishing. Can you match it? And then they have the right to match that deal or not, right? So that's how they kind of usually retain some kind of rights of the game in the future. Sometimes publishers, very rarely, take co-ownership of the IP or even full ownership of the IP. Very, very rare in today's market. Very, very rare. Hardly ever happens to it. But generally speaking, it's on the rev share of the game, right? It's project financing. That's how they're making money. So there's a lot at stake on the publisher side is what I wanted to get across first and foremost. Now that we understand what's at stake for publishers and we've also talked about the market environment, there's like, say, almost 19,000 games released on Steam alone last year, not counting all the other platforms. Like mobile, it's even bigger, right? In terms of the number of games released. Considering that and considering the number of games that go to the graveyard and doesn't make it to market as well, that do get pitched around, there's a lot of games out there being pitched to publishers to say, hey, I've got a great game. Will you give us the investment? So publishers are like, hey, the success rate in the games industry isn't quite what it used to be, to put it mildly. We're going to try and reduce our risk. So how do they reduce their risk, right? Are they going to invest in a game that's really, really early, not a single line of code, just a paper pitch? Are they going to invest in a game that's got an early playable, looks really ropey, doesn't quite look like a finished product, but the fun of the game might be proven? Are they going to invest in a vertical slice where it actually looks like the final product and you've got one section of the game that looks really good, plays really well? Are they going to invest in a game that's already in an alpha state? Maybe it's already got a community. Maybe it's already got momentum, wish lists, a huge, vibrant, social media presence. It's already gone viral. I mean, obviously, the later it is, the further that risk is reduced, right? And so it becomes a lot more of a, okay, this is a sure bet. Like, we can fund this. The developer's already done a lot of the work. They've already proven the fun of the game. It already looks like the final product. It already has a vibrant audience. All we need to do now is bring it to all the other platforms, do the marketing work, and support the game beyond the initial release, right? Like the later it is in the project, obviously even if say they're the project that's right at the beginning of the game project, they haven't got a single line of code, they're asking for $1 million versus a different game towards the end of the kind of really near release, but they still need $1 million. Which $1 million is going to be lower risk, right? Obviously,
it's a
the
competition
latter,
thing. Yeah,
right?
you obviously go for the better deal. So I guess because there are better deals on the table, then it's almost not worth pitching with paper pitches. Like all that effort and energy, like from what I'm hearing, you need to be going after the Discord community and whatnot.
Yeah, the time and energy it takes, the cost that it takes to go out and go to the conventions, network, blah, blah, blah. With a paper pitch, would it be better spending it on your own team, on your own game, getting it to a certain point, and then pitch? You know, it's probably better to do the latter, right? So like now, so we're in an environment where publishers have to pick and choose, right? Well, they always have done. They've always picked and chosen the cream of the crop as they see it. And they've picked the very best teams, the very best games that they can find and secure. Today, it's just that there's so many more games, so many more teams going out pitching that the sort of like bar to entry to secure that investment is higher than it used to be, right? So before it was like you'd pitch a game, you'd maybe have a really early playable, lots of gray box, you know, but maybe the core mechanic of the game's been proven. Maybe it was even a paper pitch, and you could maybe secure an investment. Whereas today, there's
what numbers
so
are we
many
looking
more
at, Bobby? I'm curious here because you mentioned investment. Like, what are people asking for now? Because I'm wondering if that's something we can nip in the bud for someone listening. Like, what's a realistic number to look for now versus, pre-COVID?
Pre-COVID, during COVID even, I think you could go out pitching for multiple $1 million. And if you had the right pitch, the right team, you'd probably be able to land a deal. Today, it's much harder to land a deal where you're talking about multi-million-dollar deals, right? Like 5 million and above is really, really hard to secure today.
What are most of the deals you're looking at now?
Pardon?
What are most of the deals you're looking at now? Yeah.
Like the thing is, like, if you go 5 million and above, there's probably 10 or less publishers investing at that level today. Whereas before there was many more. Today, if you're under $1 million, you're probably going to be able to find a deal. Like a lot of indie publishers are working at $1 million or below, maybe even $250,000, right? It's their upper end for a lot of indie publishers. So if you're between, say, $250,000 to $1 million, you'll probably be able to find a deal. Like you'll be able to speak to lots of people who can go to that kind of budget range. If you go beyond $1 million, you're getting to the point where you really need to have proven the product market fit before you can secure that investment.
Okay. So I want to make this practical now. So from my understanding, with all that context of the publisher, I'm a developer and I want to secure, let's say that $250K, right? How is that actually possible? Am I supposed to be bootstrapping it? Is there another way to get funding before I do publishers? I'm just trying to think if you have an example where you've taken or seen a game, or like when you look at your consulting clients, for example, like what are people missing that they need to check box first before they start, going to the convention and invest in those resources?
Yeah, it's a great question, Harry. So like people tend to do it in different ways, but either they're bootstrapping it, they're moonlighting it, they've got a full-time job, like the other day I was talking to a developer. He's from country A, he currently lives in country B, and he's working in a pub, right? And he's already got 2 games in his back catalog, quite successful games, but his third game, he's having to bootstrap again, right? And it's a team, but one of the co-founders, that's what he's doing. So you can either moonlight it, bootstrap it, right? Or maybe there's, the friends, the families, the fools that will invest into your company early. And that way you can fund the time that it takes for you to get to a certain point to prove to a publisher, look, I've actually got a really good game here. There's some playable code and it looks really good. It plays really well, blah, blah, blah. Or maybe there's a government scheme, some kind of accelerator, some kind of incubator that you can take part in, and you can do it that way. Each country has, not every country has, but there's quite a few countries that have really good sort of ways of fostering and growing the games industry at a
Any examples?
grassroots level. So, like in the UK, there's Creative England. There's like a whole bunch, right? There's so many of them. Like, and in Europe, there's the European Fund as well, and per country on a per country level, there's lots of different government programs. There's incubators like Game BCN. I just went to Lithuania, where they've also got an accelerator there. There's like literally the list goes on. So look, wherever you're based, have a look. Just Google it. You'll be able to find it. There's just too many to mention, really. But
yeah, fair. Is there anything people need to know about that? I'm just curious. Is that because I'm guessing they don't take everyone in, right? They need to do something. So is there something to help them?
Usually these government schemes are like based on jurisdiction, right? You need to be based in the right place to be, to be eligible, to be part of it. So me being based in the UK, I can't just go to Belgium and benefit from the scheme there. Well, technically with the Belgian one, you kind of can, but like there's countries that all run it. And generally speaking, what is good about these government schemes is they're usually the most friendliest, like developer friendliest type of program there is in terms of the funding that you receive. Like for every dollar that you receive, it's going to cost you a lot less than any other funding source that we've talked about so far. The only problem with it is, or the only negative with it is, usually it doesn't fully fund your game. Usually it means you have to live in that right place, or your team needs to be based there, or your company needs to be incorporated there, or whatever. And usually there's like rounds of these things happening throughout the year. And maybe it's only happening once a year. So you need to apply by a certain date, and then you'll get the money X many months later, right? So there's a bit of a lag between when you can apply and when you actually get the money even. And it might not work for you in that sense. So the timing thing could be a problem. The location thing could be a problem. But generally speaking, if you are successful with it, they're really, really good programs to be a part of. So I'd Google stuff based on where you are and see how you can kind of benefit from that stuff. And that can
they treat it like a publisher, Bobby, just to clarify. So if they want to be successful in being selected, because I'm guessing not all applications get selected. In your experience, is it kind of what we discussed earlier, like as promising of a game as possible, or is it different because it's a government?
No, it depends. It does depend, but usually publishers don't really do prototype funding anymore. They tend to come in a bit later now. Whereas these government stuff, usually these incubators, accelerators, etc., usually they're quite happy to take on stuff that are paper pitches. But then some of them, they're not really like for that kind of early part of game development. Sometimes you get these schemes that are really for games that have already been in development for a while, and you benefit by tax credits, right? So there's these kind of tax credit based kind of government schemes as well, which is more for like later down the road in terms of how you benefit from it. But generally speaking, the hit rate should be quite good. And it should allow you to kind of get started, right? And get a project off the ground is usually what they're for. So they're quite good in that way, in that respect.
Alrighty. So let's get straight into, I guess, just getting that deal signed, right? So when it comes to the pitch, when it comes to the publishing deal, the number one thing that a developer needs to do to secure a publisher.
All right. So now, unlike before, you need to prove the product market fit, right? Like that will definitely help. If you've already got strong amount of wish lists, I'm talking 50K wish lists or above, really, then people will absolutely take you very, very seriously. Ideally, try and do that without having done a Next Fest, because if you've already done a Next Fest, or if you've already started early access, that might turn off a lot of publishers. So if you can get that momentum going without doing a next, because at Next Fest you can only do it once per game, right? And it's quite an important beat for indie games going on Steam. So if you can get that momentum without doing a Next Fest, great. Also try and there's a lot of pitches where it's like we want to do an early access at this point and then a full release at this point, which is totally fine to include in your pitch. But when you pitch it, position it as the early access is a optional thing. It's not a must thing, because some publishers don't like doing early access on Steam. And it's because when you do an early access, you don't get all the features available to you for full release of a game in terms of like marketing the game on Steam. There's inefficiencies that happen because of the fact that you've done an early access. So yeah, it ends up becoming quite like expensive in terms of time, effort, and money from a publishing perspective to do an early access game, right? So like, if you're self-publishing, by all means, you know, if you need the feedback from the community and if you need that revenue to be able to finish the game, absolutely do the early access. But if you're talking to a publisher, some publishers are like, well, if we release a game as an early access, considering our brand as a publisher, the community might respond quite negatively towards that, because they'll be like, well, you're a publisher. Like you should fully fund the game and release a game when it's ready, not do an early access and get money out of us when the game's not finished, right? And so that's like one community kind of lens thing. But in terms of like the actual, how you build momentum and hype and create success on Steam, some games, you're building momentum and hype, and then you do the early access and you get like a huge injection of interest in the game, and then it ticks along, and then you get to the full version 1.0 and people expect it to do another jump because now it's version 1.0, but actually it just plateaus. It just carries on as usual, right? That happens more often than not, actually. So to do an early access game and to do a version 1.0 release successfully, it takes a lot of effort and time and careful curation for it to be done really, really well. And not a lot of people have figured out how to do that really well, to be honest. And I think they want to make sure that when they do a release, they do the release really, really well and give it all of the time and love and effort to make sure it's a super successful release, rather than doing sort of like I wouldn't say a half-assed release, but, you know, like maybe taking a risk almost by going early access, right? Because if you go early access, like, why are you doing it? You're doing it maybe to get feedback early so you can focus on the right areas of the game, give it the right polish that it needs, and make sure that the right scope feature sets in the game for the version 1.0. The other major reason why a lot of self-publishing indies do it is because they need that revenue to be able to support the game funding-wise to get to version 1.0. If you're a publisher, money's not really the issue, right? If feedback's really the issue, then actually you could do that feedback stuff behind closed doors. You could do closed betas, whatever, right? And get the feedback that you need without having the game potentially getting negative reviews because of the fact that it's unfinished going into early access and then impacting the momentum of the game later on. So, I don't know. There's just, I'm probably waffling at this point, but like there's multiple reasons why publishers are a bit hesitant about going into early access with their published games. So if you're going to position your game as something that you might do an early access with, position it as you might do an early access rather than we definitely want to do early access, right? Or at least call out why you want to do the early access. And then from that, you can have a conversation with the potential publisher about, well, what other avenues are there to achieve that goal rather than doing early access? Also, I'd recommend people to find a way to get to the top of the pile of all of the other pitches going into a publisher.
What is the secret to get to the top of the pile?
Yeah, that's just it, man. So like, if you think about like pitching your game to a publisher, like sending a job, your CV for a job application for some vacancy in a company, right? Like if you're looking for a job, you write your CV, you find a vacancy on a website for a company, and you're like, yeah, I really like that company and I really like the sound of that job. I want to send my CV in. You know, do you just send it through their job application portal and hope for the best? Or is there a different way for you to get that CV in and make sure your CV is seen by the hiring manager, right? That's what I'm talking about when I say get to the top of the pile. So like when you're pitched into a publisher, there's like various companies you can go to make sure you do get to the top of the pile. to make sure that your pitch isn't just going through some submission portal and you're not sure if it's really seen or taken seriously at all. Like, one option is you know someone who knows someone, right? And you get a warm recommendation. Like, those warm recommendations are like really quite valuable. So if you know someone who has previously worked with that publisher or knows someone at that publisher and can go, hey, I can do a nice intro for you and connect you, great, do that, right? If there's a way for you to meet that publisher face-to-face, physically, do that. That's also super powerful.
You think do that before sending the application in?
Yeah. So like usually when you go to like a game conference or game event, there'll be like some kind of online tool where you can book in a meeting with someone. And therefore you're not submitting your game through their website, but you're just saying, hey, can I meet you at this game event? And I can pitch you my game for the next 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever the slot is of that meeting, right? And then you can actually speak to them face to face and you can communicate beyond what's on paper.
Yeah, you got the energy, you have a back and forth. It's a big difference for sure.
It's a huge...
One thing I want to say before I forget, I recently joined the Slack for the UK games industry. And I know a few people in there who you can just say, hey, I have this. Does anyone know someone who knows someone? And it's pretty brilliant for that. So that's one example of how to kind of do that without, I guess, being cringe. Like, well, I don't know one. Well, there's communities you can join and then try to leverage a community, not necessarily like individual relationships.
Yeah, definitely. I'm in that same Slack channel, by the way. But like, yeah, so you can, if you don't already have an existing network, create that network, right? So that you can do that kind of activity. Like maybe there's socials or some kind of online or physical social event where you can go and join in with people in the industry and therefore, use that to kind of try and forge connections. Whether it's on Discord or Slack or whatever it may be. There's like so many of these things where you can kind of take part. So you could do those things. There's also things called like game agents. I don't know if that's quite common knowledge, but there's teams, companies who represent studios and their sole goal, mission is to find publishing deals or raise money for studios that require that funding. So you can pitch to those kind of service providers and see if they would have you on their portfolio. Obviously, they only want so many clients and they're only going to take clients that they really gel with, right? That fits their strategy.
Is that a rev share model as well?
It depends. Some of them are on retainers. Some of them are on retainer and some kind of rev share. Some of them is purely on a rev share. So it totally depends.
Wow. So that's good practice, right? Because they'll probably give you feedback.
Yeah, they would too. Yeah, absolutely. And they'll help you polish your pitch. They'll connect you to the right investor type people, publishers and whatnot.
That's a big unlock. I just realized, I think, like if I'm a developer, like I know there's some people I helped get introductions who are looking to fund a game and they never mentioned pitching to these people. And I used to actually make those introductions like, these people help people find publishers. Maybe it's talk to them. And then I've seen them in person kind of roasting the deck saying this part, a publisher won't like that because of X, Y, Z. It's like, well, they won't get that from the publisher because usually the publisher doesn't want to get the horror story was like, they shut down our game. So they might have been kind of hesitant to give that direct feedback. So I think that's actually a very big thing to take away is where, yes, obviously talk to the publisher in person, but you might as well leverage the free-ish feedback, even if you don't end up using a game agent, to pitch to them. So you can like sharpen the pick.
The famous ones are agents like DDM, ISM, CAA, Rocket Ride, Guild. I mean, the list goes on. There's a bunch of agents out there. So look for game agents. They could be really, really good. Also at Kando, we kind of do that work. We act as an external scout for publishers. So we don't take a retainer or rev share from the studios, but we have contracts with the publishers. So for the developer, it's free. And we're like a headhunter, right? In the recruiting world, we're kind of working with the hiring manager and we're making sure we put the right candidates in front of them, sort of thing.
Yeah, it's very similar to what I used to do as a recruiter. I used to recommend devs, just rather than pitch to studios directly, go find all the agency recruiters that do your job, get on those calls, and they usually will roast you and tell you the current jobs before you start applying. And I think this is a very good parallel.
Yeah, totally. And then maybe another thing is, like, this is an obvious one, right? But like, do your research. Like, absolutely do your research.
Let's break it down though. What does that mean? Like, what
like
you say that, but why
I'd
are people
say
missing it?
in two different ways. I'd say do your research. One is do your research about your segment, about your game. Like, who are your closest competitors? Why would anyone care about your game when you release it? Like, what makes your game special? Why would someone care
So
about
in
it?
the context of the market, where does your game fit? So you're saying that some developers are saying this game is great because it's great, and then their deck is not including the fact of where that game fits.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So, like, really understand your segment, become a subject matter expert within your field. So know all of your competitors inside out, play all their games, really understand like what makes your game sing against them. What features do you have that they don't have? What scope, size, depth is your game versus theirs? And how are you positioning your game versus their games, right? And don't badmouth the other competitors that are out there ever, because you might be pitching to someone who actually worked on such a game or has a really good friend that worked on such a game. It's a really small industry at the end of the day. So, but definitely take away learnings from your competitors and apply that to your game. So do your research in terms of your segment is one. And then part two is do your research on who you're pitching to, right? Understand what it is that they're looking for. Understand and really kind of like distill and digest what language they're using and try and use that when you're pitching to them. So they're like, oh, you're speaking my language, right? You totally get what I'm looking for. You're exactly the game that I want to sign, and you're exactly the team that I want to work with. So do your research on at least on the really hot prospects. You can't do it for all of the publishers that are out there because there's so many. But like maybe have like a top 10, this is my hot prospect publisher list, and dig into those 10 like deeply, really study them before you start pitching to them, and maybe even tailor your pitch slightly to make sure that it's in keeping with exactly what that publisher's kind of looking for and what their activities are. I think if you did all those things, so let's recap, prove the market fit, get to the top of the pile and doing your research, then your chances of success will increase dramatically.
I just feel for the developer who, like, I guess skipped and then didn't know that they've skipped a stage, and then they find out 6-12 months later, right? Because they've put all that time in. When, like, is there a thing where a publisher just does not give that feedback? And like, is there a lot of developers out there who just simply don't know this, and they keep, I guess, trying to pitch a game? Is that common?
It does happen. Yes, it does happen. And the thing is, when you submit a game, submit your pitch to a publisher, you're not guaranteed to get feedback. Sometimes publishers will just not respond, right? Some of them won't respond.
Everyone has their own policy, right?
Yeah. And some of them will respond and they'll give you like the answer is a yes or a no or whatever. And when it's a no, maybe they don't go into the details of why exactly it's a no. And even if they do provide some detail, it'll be really top level, right? It won't ever be like a deep report. Like that's not
move this page here, for example.
Yeah, they're not going to give like detailed feedback. Like, why would they? That's not what they're there for, right? They're there to focus on the games that they want to work with, and they can't write a detailed report for every rejection they provide when they're looking at 1,000, 3,000 games a year. So it can't be the onus on them. It just wouldn't work. While I always say to developers, take every rejection as an opportunity to get some feedback and learn from it. At the same time, you have to kind of, have the right expectation about how much feedback you might get from a publisher, right? And if you're face to face with someone and you're pitching and they give you a no on the spot, take it graciously and take that moment to learn as much as possible. Because if you're in their face, you can literally just change the dynamic of the conversation. Try and get a no is better, right? You don't want someone to go, yeah, we'll look into it later, and then actually just reject you a month or two down the line, right? You want to know, like, it's a no now, and then change the conversation to what can I do to improve this pitch? And do you know anyone else I can pitch this to, right? Because a lot of these game scouts talk to each other all the time. And it might be that they know someone that is actually looking for your kind of game. And if you're in their face and you're like, tell me what I need to improve, then they're more likely, hopefully, to be a bit more honest and give you the rest of that time of that meeting to talk about what needs to improve for them to maybe in the future, you can pitch back to them once you've shown that progress and made that improvement. Or maybe in the future, they can introduce you to the right team that is looking for what you're kind of pitching for. It's much easier to get that kind of feedback face-to-face than over email.
Yeah, naturally, 100%. And you can, like we said earlier, like go to the game agents, go to the, I guess, not necessarily, there was one person who described it like you have tier 1 publishers, tier 2, tier 3, and I think game agents is, I guess, the one below. It's like if you're going to start pitching, you don't go to the cream de la crop because you usually only get one first impression. You always get one first impression. So you want that to be your most refined pitch.
But generally speaking, I would say you have up to 3 shots per publisher, like 3 attempts per publisher for the same game. I'd say if they say no the first time, there's a really good chance when you send it through again a few months later with improvements, they'll look at it with some seriousness the second time. And there's a slim chance, but there is a chance that they'll look at it the third time as well. But beyond 3 times, it's probably never going to happen.
That's good to know. Okay, amazing. So just wrapping up, Bobby, because we've covered a lot of ground in terms of something you wanted to get off your chest potentially. So if there's a developer listening to this, and with the context of listening to this conversation, like what else would you tell them? What would you want to leave them with?
I'd say, I've got so many pet peeves, Harry.
Can we do a quick fire round? Can we do a quick fire round?
Honestly, I don't even know where to start. But all right, I'll try and give like good recommendations, right? So, like say for example, this year I didn't go to DICE in Las Vegas, and I'm not going to GDC in San Francisco, and I've been to those events multiple times over the years. Like it's like, you know, it was almost like a staple diet in my calendar. I would go to these events, right? And this year, like I mentioned earlier, I went to Lithuania. That was for my first time. Never been to Lithuania before until then. And I'm going to Serbia for an event there called For the Win Conference. And then I'm going to Romania for an event there. And I'm going off the beaten track. And the rest of the Kando team are actually going to the kind of regular events that I used to always go to, right? So they're going to, I don't know, like Gamescom LATAM and Reboot and blah, Nordic Game Conference and Digital Dragons and all of this. Like, yeah, like they're great events. They're really, really good events. So definitely, if you're planning on pitching your game, going to these events to meet people face to face is, I think, very, very important and highly advised. But like, you don't have to go to just the big ones, right? Like, think about your calendar of at what point is my pitch going to be at this point ready? And then later in the year, maybe my build will be this much more polished. So actually, I should have an event plan for just after that, or maybe a month or 2 after that. And then it doesn't have to be physical events. It doesn't have to be the most prestigious, expensive events, right? You can go to a website called Game Conf Guide. It's like a game conference guide website. And you can see all of the events that are happening throughout the year. You can see which ones are physical events, which ones are digital only, which ones are hybrid, where it's both online and physical. You can see when it's happening, how much the ticket price is, how to take part in the event, blah, blah, blah. Go to that website, plan your event out, budget for it, right, in terms of time and money, and actually have like an event schedule. And if you went to GDC, like from Europe, that's what, $1,000, $2,000 for the flight?
More.
Maybe
it's like
more.
$4,000 total to go there. For a couple of people who I know went, like the whole event.
It's like $350 a night for the hotel. You know, buying a bottle of water can cost you like $5, $10. It's crazy expensive. And it's like, all right, do I go to GDC and spend all of my money there and put all my eggs into that basket? Or do I instead go to a different event and another event and another event and another event and increase my chances that way, right? And you can actually think about things a bit more strategically in terms of making sure you get most bang for buck. So go to gameconfguide.com. That's a proper pro tip, that is, honestly, like do that. And then also, like talk to me if you want, find me on LinkedIn or go to my website. Maybe I can help secure your publishing deal. Or talk to any of those agents that I mentioned, or maybe you can try and like network like locally and online, and really start engaging with the games industry beyond your team and beyond your geographic location. So that way you can have a bit more of a sort of halo effect, right? And you can start to really collaborate as an industry and try and, get those warm intros that you wouldn't have otherwise had, maybe.
Sweet. So we go to the actual event, Game Conference Guide. But yeah, there's a lot of events. I'm on the gameconfguide.com. There's pretty much there's pretty much 3 or 4 every week. So like, for example, the event I'm going to, I'll be going to a lot of the Pocket Gamers. I'll go to GDC Y Festival, which is one in Cyprus. And one thing I would add to what you said, some of these conferences do meetups, which aren't public, but they're like really regular and amazing. So the Cyprus one, they do a monthly meetup, and a lot of it's paid for. No thing to get in, but literally went there. Everyone's got name tags, decision makers, CEOs, publishers, literally having a monthly meetup. So I guess putting in that energy to find out where those monthly meetups are and trying to get there, that's a very nice environment, I feel, to kind of network and with either it be with other developers, but also other publishers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sweet. Fantastic. Alrighty. Bobby, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Where can people find you? What's the best way?
You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can find me by going to the website, candofactory.com, or you can go to Blue Sky and find Cando Factory there as well.
Sweet. So everyone, those links will be in the podcast description. Bobby, thank you so much. And everyone at home, hope you enjoyed this playbook. Alrighty. Goodbye, everyone.